I think we're good to go. Mike, you have anything you want to say before we start off?
No, sir. I think we're good.
Okay, so first thing on the agenda, you all should have gotten the minutes from the March meeting. Take a few minutes to look at it if you haven't. Everyone okay? Can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Liz,
Yes,
there's just one grammatical error. Can I ask for a minor correction?
of course.
Section D, subsection C, line 2, where it says wayfinding and signage was discussed, should be were, just to be correct.
Okay, Angela's probably recorded that. Thank you. Motion to approve the minutes with that change incorporated.
I move to
Second.
approve.
Second.
Let's go around the horn. We said we would vote last time, but one by one. Angela, do you vote yes? Not Angela, Diane. My brain is.
Yes.
Michael Pierce,
Yes.
Bain,
Yes.
David,
Yep.
and Robert.
Yeah.
Okay, motion carries 5-0. We've got a meeting chock full of stuff, so I thought I'd just do a quick update and review the agenda. You all should have the agenda in front of you. Just some highlights. We had new business was to discuss the air service development, and we're going to do that first since we have Doug Blissett from Mead and Hunt with us. So Doug has prepared a presentation I'm definitely looking forward to hearing. That'll be how we'll start the meeting off. And this way, Doug, you're welcome to stay with us, but you may have some other more important things. So you'll go first. Mike is going to give us airport manager's report. I think a couple of highlights will be the financial report, and you'll see the numbers for April, which will give us a good idea of where we're headed. Also, Mike's going to talk about the COVID-19 impact on the airport, and Josh has graciously volunteered. It wasn't exactly on the agenda. He's going to update us on what the ACC Gov and the county and the state are doing in terms of COVID-19. Then we have old business, and two of the highlights will be we're going to hopefully confirm where we're at on the strategic initiatives, most of which I sent out a document to you. We'll just quickly review that. And then it's hard to believe, but I finally finished the performance measures. So I'd like to just do a very brief presentation of those. Then we have under new business, Mike's going to go over the new budget for us, and that'll be the highlight of that section. So anyone have any other item they'd like to see on the agenda? Take that, that's a no. So we're ready to turn it over to Doug. Mike, you probably have to share the screen with him.
Actually not. He can go ahead and do it.
Les, I think I can do it. I'll
mine is
try
not
and-
on, but mine where it says share content is not an option. So, and by the way, before Doug starts, we haven't had the chance, and I won't say this is in person, Doug, but it's as close as it's going to come, to really thank you and Mead and Hunt sincerely for all the great work you guys did on the SCASDEP proposal. It was terrific.
I appreciate it. It was our privilege, and we felt like you guys presented a really strong case, and just pleased to see that the department agreed with us on it. And I think I've mentioned to you guys before that a couple of the staff members up there have been very complimentary of the applications that we put together, including the Athens. But we actually had I think 6 of the meat and hunt prepared applications win awards this year. So we felt like it was a good overall effort, but you guys had a fantastic case to present. So,
Well, thank you.
can everybody see the presentation that I've shared titled Meat and Hunt, Athens Airport, COVID-19 Impact on the Airline Industry?
One quick thing, Doug, I should have said, forgive me before you start. Given the format, it's probably best to hold some questions. And when Doug is finished, just write them down and then we'll go around the horn and ask some questions. I think Angela and Mike have turned off the offline chat because it's somewhat distracting. So when we're done, we'll field questions. Sorry.
Great, no problem. Well, as all of you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has had unprecedented impact on both the population and economies of the world, and no industry has been more visibly impacted than the air travel industry has. And so this presentation is designed to hopefully give you a good update on both the perspective of the impact on the U.S. airline industry, as well as some potential recovery scenarios, what airlines and other agencies have been doing to try and best position ourselves for that recovery, and hopefully give you a feel for what kind of timeline at least the experts out there are talking about in terms of the COVID impact. So I'll start this. Let's see. For some reason, there we go. The first slide I've got is showing the long-term, in this case, 40-year impact of various outside influences on the air travel industry in the U.S. This is a graph of total U.S. passengers that flew each year, the red line showing it progressing from 1980 to 2019. And then the light blue bars or gray bars overlaid upon that are the economic recessions that have happened. And so in terms of long-term history, this is 40 years, but I've done the graph as far back as 70 years, and it looks essentially the same. You've seen somewhere around a 3% average annual growth in long-term traffic for the industry. And really the only times that have been negatively impacted are either the economic recessions that you see there or the 9/11 impact, where the entire industry was shut down for 3 days, and the security measures for the industry have changed forever. Now, on top of that, I've overlaid both the last two pandemics that have occurred, SARS back in the 2002, 2003 timeframe, and then H1N1, which otherwise known as the swine flu, which occurred in late or early 2009, 2010. And as you can see from the graph, both of those occurred in, sort of the end of several down troughs of recession-related impact, but you can see no visible impact from either one of those events. Now, they were significantly different events. SARS was largely Asian oriented. The caseload and the number of worldwide deaths was dramatically smaller. Swine flu, on the other hand, originated in North America, and in terms of worldwide impact, the CDC estimates that they had somewhere between 700 million and 1.4 billion cases worldwide, with a death toll of somewhere around 284,000 people. COVID is a completely different animal from either one of those. You can see the case count is nowhere near what the H1N1 impact ultimately led to be, but we've already surpassed the total number of worldwide deaths that we've seen from the swine flu. And these numbers, the cases and deaths are worldwide totals, but in the US, you guys probably know there's been somewhere around 1.7 million cases so far in the US. And we were, as of this morning, we're just under 100,000 total deaths. So it's similar in impact and similar in terms of overall death rate and caseload to the swine flu. But because of the different nature of how this spread around the world, the contagious nature of it, it's had unprecedented impacts on our industry as well as many others. And so we'll look at that a little bit closer as we go through this presentation. Obviously, the initial impact, the U.S. airlines were fairly quick to react. I mean, they started seeing caseloads build up in the U.S. in the March timeframe, and in late March, the airlines were already canceling on an ad hoc basis. In early April, these capacity reductions shown in this slide were announced by most of these airlines, and you can see, anywhere from 70 to 90% capacity reductions spread throughout the industry. I guess Southwest was the most bullish out there with only 60% capacity reductions for May and early June. But every airline felt a significant impact out there and made fairly quick and significant adjustments to both their domestic and international schedules. We'll see in June a gradual increase in some of these capacity levels, but it's still very gradual, and the airlines are very quick to tell you that they don't know what July and beyond is going to look like at this point. They're placing a bet on what they think June's capacity needs to be, but it is still very much an evolving situation for all of the airlines out there. To give a better perspective on what happened to demand for air travel over this time frame, this next chart shows the total TSA security throughput for the entire U.S. And I plotted from March 1st till yesterday, and you can see at the beginning of March, the total demand was pretty close to what we saw at this point last year. But by mid-March, it had dropped by about 40% compared to last year's levels. And then by the end of March, it was down 92% versus last year, and it's hovered at those greatly diminished levels ever since. You can see, a little bit of demand growth in the most recent few weeks, but overall, total TSA throughput was down 95% for the month of April and down 91% so far in May. And to give a little clearer picture on the more recent time frame, this next chart just shows those same plots since April 1st. And then the blue line that's floating through that is essentially a 7-day average of each of those individual daily plots. And what you can see pretty quickly is that the traffic continued to decline until around mid-April and bottomed out somewhere around 95,000 passengers a day flowing through the system. But since that mid-April timeframe, you've seen it continue to grow. And the most recent 7-day average is up almost 3 times what we saw at the very bottom of the trough. But I got to remind you that the latest weekly average is still down 91% from last year's levels. So we've got an awful long way to go, but the recovery in terms of demand seems to have started. Now, this next slide is an attempt to try and put size and scale to the overall revenue damage that this is doing to the U.S. airline industry. And so I've tried to parse out the key drivers of the impact on revenue during this time frame. And the biggest piece is obviously capacity, which based on our own projections, which granted, can still evolve over the coming months, we expect capacity for the U.S. industry to be down about 40% for the full year. 40% reduction in capacity is going to drive about $70 billion in damage to the U.S. industry. In addition to the capacity hit, obviously demand's falling even more, so load factors are going to drop somewhere around 25 percentage points on average for the rest of the year. And that's going to drive another $30 billion in damage to the industry. And on top of that, we believe that as the airlines try to lure people back onto airplanes, you're going to see more and more fare sales out there, more aggressive pricing positions out there. So I'm expecting another 20% hit to average fares or yields out there for the industry, which would be almost another $15 billion. But add all that up, and that's over $115 billion worth of revenue. That includes cargo and ancillary revenues for the airlines. But that's the kind of hurdle that the U.S. industry is facing right now. And this is just domestic revenue. So for the airlines like American and United and Delta, who have significant international presence, you can see another probably $70 billion worth of damage from the international networks out there. But that just gives you a general sort of size and scope of the challenge that the U.S. airlines are up against in terms of overall revenue loss. So now let's go back to that long-term trend chart and plot the projected traffic decline for 2020 on it. And as you can clearly see, this is completely unprecedented. And once again, if you took this back 70 years, there's no other event in the industry that comes anywhere close to the impact that COVID-19 is going to have on overall demand. It essentially is expected to drop to levels that we last saw in sort of 1985, 1986 timeframe. So to put it another way, this pandemic could erase over 35 years of traffic growth for the industry. Now, having said that, we do expect to see a pretty steep recovery as the capacity starts to come back and as people get more confident in traveling. But that recovery still won't get you anywhere close to the demand that we were seeing pre-COVID levels for a number of years. And obviously that kind of overwhelming impact to demand hopefully makes it clear as to why the federal government felt like they had to step in with CARES Act support. This slide highlights in summary the overall funding that has been set up and is in the process of being provided. They set aside $10 billion in total funding for the airports out there. It was split into 3 different parcels. A little more than $3.5 billion distributed based on 2018 employments, another $3.5 billion distributed based on airport debt service and airport reserves, and then another $2 billion available in a similar manner to current AIP funding, but significant overall support offered out there for the airports. Airlines even, larger supporting funding, a total of $57 billion between all individual components. $25 billion of that was in terms of grants, primarily intended for employee salaries and wages. The main caveat here being that airlines who accepted these support payments had to agree not to furlough any employees prior to September 30th. And they also had to agree to, certain minimum service levels. There was another $25 billion put out for passenger airlines in the form of low interest loans that are offered. There's another $4 billion for cargo carriers, and then another $3 billion for the contractors like ground handling personnel and other contract workers out there. The next slide, I wanted to highlight the financial impact that the industry has seen so far. And this is based on the top 7 airlines in the US, and based on their first quarter earnings reports. they saw $5.1 billion in net losses. That compares to a little more than $1.8 billion in net profits for the first quarter of 2019. Revenues for this entire group were down almost 20%. The average net profit margin fell from a positive 5% first quarter last year to negative 15% this year. American and Delta, or American and United fared the worst with net margins that were in the 25% range. Delta and Southwest were significantly better, but still had huge negative turnarounds. Saw the same thing throughout the industry. Every airline reported similar results, other than SkyWest Airlines, which is largely a capacity by business arrangement. So they were still profitable during the first quarter, mainly because the major airlines were still paying them for all the capacity that they were still flying out there. On average, load factors for the first quarter were down about 10 points. I think the first quarter load factor was about 72% for these 7 carriers. That suggests that the month of March, which was obviously the only month that was really impacted, 50% load factors during that time frame. Keep in mind that all this massive damage was really only done in the last 15 to 20 days of the quarter. So imagine what the second quarter is going to look like when load factors are expected to run somewhere in the 25% to 30% range. All of the revenue impacts will have been more fully baked into that quarter. Now, granted, almost all the major carriers have significantly reduced their expected cash burn, but the second quarter is going to be a really, really ugly scenario. To date, the top 8 publicly traded airlines have lost 2/3 of their overall market value since February. It's pretty devastating out there. I wanted to give a little bit more perspective on the individual capacity reductions. And here I plot the top 5 US airlines, and the light blue bar is their overall system-wide seats in June of 2019. The dark blue is what that looks like in May of 2020. And then the gray bar is what's projected or what's loaded for June 2020. And as you can see, pretty dramatic changes for all of these airlines. On average, you're seeing, about an 80% reduction from last year. American and JetBlue are a little bit better than that at averaging 70% reductions. And then you can see Southwest for June is almost at 50 or just a little above 50% compared to the capacity that they had loaded last year, but still significant reductions. You can see the slight build going from May to June, but it's only slight, and we still have a long way to go. Now, the next slide shows a different perspective on remaining service out there. And here I plotted the number of nonstop markets that each of those 5 carriers served last summer compared to May and June of this year. And it's a little better picture here when you look at total number of nonstop markets served. But keep in mind that the markets that are served this year may have a fraction of the capacity that those same markets had it in last year. But in general, you're seeing somewhere around 40% reduction for the deltas, and our capacity levels are at 40% of what they were, or the market served are at 40% of what they were served at this point last year for United and Delta. American and Southwest are a little bit better. JetBlue, the same thing, but still a significant impact on the number of markets that each of these carriers served out there. This next slide is my attempt to put some perspective on what the recovery might look like. This is one projection out of, there are literally dozens of them out there, but I think this one fits in well with most of the projections that I've seen from sources that I trust out there in the industry. And we'll start with the seat reductions. You can see for April and May, once again, these are domestic capacity reductions, down somewhere around 70% for the April and the May timeframe. And you can see that gradually continue to build through the rest of the year, but we still expect the calendar year to end up down about 40% from where 2019 finished up. The demand, as you can see there, is trailing even the capacity reductions as average load factors on the remaining capacity that's left out there are still going to drop anywhere from 20 to 30 load factor points, depending on the months. So we're expecting, or I'm expecting, overall passenger levels to be down close to 60% for the full year. And then, as I mentioned before, we expect that the airlines will be aggressively trying to lure people back onto the airplane to assure them that it is safe, and that will involve some fare sales, some discounting that we haven't seen before. I'm projecting somewhere around a 20% reduction in average fares for the year, so that's what gets you to the 64% overall reduction in revenue projections. As you can see, I also plotted the first quarter of 2021, and both seat levels, passenger levels, and revenue levels are still significantly below where they were pre-COVID. I'm expecting this capacity and demand to remain far below at least until the mid to late 2021 for capacity, and I wouldn't expect passenger demand to be back to reasonable load factor levels until 2022 or beyond. So it's going to be a long time before the industry sees pre-COVID levels on revenue performance. There are a lot of people making projections out there. Most people are saying at least 2 to 3 years. I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see that kind of revenue level performance until 2025 or later. Now, granted, there are, a lot of people making, more dire sort of projections, so, I think it's safe to say, in fact, all of the major airline leaders are saying, as they emerge from this, they plan to be significantly smaller than they were pre-COVID level. A lot of airlines have announced a number of significant fleet changes, retiring aircraft early, postponing deliveries that were supposed to come. So I'm expecting that even after the airlines have ramped up to where they want to be by first quarter, second quarter of next year, you're still going to see overall capacity that's down, in the 10 to 20% level from where we were pre-COVID levels. And, that's a pretty dramatic hit. There's also people, most notably last week, Boeing CEO David Calhoun made the statement that he expects to see at least one U.S. airline file bankruptcy after the September 30th CARES Act support is up. While not everyone shares that opinion, they're all saying, yes, we expect to be smaller, and we expect that this recovery process will take at least 2 to 3 years and likely much longer to get back to where we expect to be. This next slide, I just captured some of the most recent statements by some of the airline CEOs out there: Ed Bastian, Doug Parker, Gary Kelly, foremost among them. I also captured a little bit of the international flavor from Willie Walsh, who runs IAG, that controls British Airways and Iberia and a host of other European airlines, as well as the head of IATA. And every one of them is saying, we expect this to take a long time to recover, and we expect to be smaller and far more efficient coming out of this overall episode. I wanted to capture a few of the key changes to procedures going on out there to try and restore some confidence in getting back on an airplane, both from the TSA and from the individual airlines. And as you can see, and as you would imagine, both masks and hand sanitizer, as well as far more intensive cleaning, figure prominently in both of those agencies' processes. You're seeing some airports that are testing temperature scanning as people go through the security checkpoints. The airlines, in addition to the mask, have revised their check-in processes, their boarding procedures. They are both doing intensive cleaning each night with each aircraft, and then major wipe downs after every flight. Delta most recently announced that they're handing out amenity kits that include a mask as well as a small packet of hand sanitizer to every customer that gets on board the airplane. They've reduced or eliminated food and beverage service in many cases, and where possible, they're limiting and in some cases eliminating middle seat use as much as possible. That's one topic that's gotten a lot of press. United sent out an email to their Mileage Plus members about 3 weeks ago saying that they were blocking all middle seats, and only a day or two after, all of a sudden the internet was flooded with pictures of people on United aircraft, selfies showing every seat on the airplane that was full. United, a few days after that, came out and clarified, saying, well, we're not are limiting the middle seat use as long as there are enough seats on the airplane to accommodate demand, which is pretty much a meaningless promise. In the last week, they've changed that to say they're taking a far more aggressive stance and plan to add capacity. Delta's also said this. They plan to add capacity when load factors in any individual market start creeping up to that 60% threshold, which would suggest that they would have to start using middle seats once it surpasses that. So, there are a lot of precautions. All of these are designed to hopefully reinforce and build confidence from potential customers that it's safe to get back on board airplanes, but it's going to be a slow and gradual process for folks to get used to this. And I might mention that it's also a costly process for the airlines as they move forward. Middle seat use is something that just can't stand for long. The airlines, granted, over the last 7-8 years have been more profitable than they've ever been in their history, but they've been that profitable by running 85% load factors out there. If you don't sell middle seats and can't run more than 2/3 full, the only way the airlines can make money again is if average fares go up anywhere from 40 to 50%, and that's not going to happen in this near-term environment. So the airlines have a long road to hoe before they expect to see any kind of semblance of profitability throughout the industry again. This last slide, I wanted to touch on, what the airports can be doing during this time to be ready. And, I want to stress that when we talk about recovery, that doesn't mean that every airport and every market is going to go back to pre-COVID levels. That just won't happen. Airline planners are going to be under, and already are under, incredible pressure to make sure that every decision they make to put a flight back, to put an individual aircraft back, to add capacity on individual routes is the best decision they can make to give them the opportunity to start to move toward a chance of positive returns again. And so while we wait for that build up, you sit there and wonder, what can I do to make sure that I'm in the best position? Well, from my perspective, the route development, air service development efforts are going to be more important than they ever had before in this in this situation, because the amount of decisions the airline planning groups are having to make for markets throughout their network, they can't begin to get down to the level of detail that we could help them understand when we're working for an individual airport. They've already said in many cases, I've been talking to network planners at Delta, American, United, and Southwest on a weekly basis, and they've already said that they will rely on our help. It'll be important to them in the process. And more importantly, they're going to be looking for clear understanding of our current opportunity and whatever support individual airports and communities can provide to help minimize the risk as they start to build back. So staying very close and in focus on your individual market is going to be important during this time frame. And more importantly, the engagement with the individual planners, maintaining those relationships, understanding what they're going through, their business, and the drivers of the decisions they're trying to make, and being a partner with them will help ensure that you maintain that relationship and helpful sort of relationship that they can draw on and that you can provide impact into. So, delivering the overall market once they do put that capacity back in place is going to be critically important as well. Obviously, the airlines are unsure about how much demand is going to come back when they do make that capacity investment, then we want to make sure that our airports are doing everything in their power to help promote and support the overall effort of getting demand back on the airplanes. So just a highlight of some of the things that I think we can be thinking about and we can be prepared for. Now, more specifically to the Athens situation, that community support, SCASD falls clearly within that framework, and the support grant, when the time comes, will be very important in that process. Obviously, that process is going to be a lot slower in coming, given everything that the airlines are up against right now. But I do want to point out that awards like ours that have a revenue guarantee component to it are, number one, available out there for a 4-year time period just on the basis of the original grant. They also have a process in place that allows you to apply for a 1-year extension to that 4-year time frame. So granted, we've got 5 years to use those funds out there, but I would be surprised there's been no update from the DOT yet. But they've always been, at least historically, been very sensitive to the challenges of the industry and the airports. And there may be consideration for extending that period even longer if it's necessary. But I hope that 5-year use time frame will be plenty to get back to a point where we're talking about adding commercial service back into Athens. But in my weekly conversations with the network planners out there, they very freely admit that they don't know what demand's going to look like. They've got a myriad of plans out there that they can implement based on how booking curves look from week to week and based on how demand starts to respond as you start to see some of the capacity come back in the June timeframe. But they'll be the first to tell you that beyond June, all bets are off. July and forward, they aren't sure how much more capacity they're going to add. They're not sure when they're going to get back to all the markets that they had to pull out of. And so they certainly tell you when they expect to start taking on new markets out of this current scenario. So, unfortunately, that's a very difficult environment to be in, but I'm as confident as I've ever been that the recovery will get back on a positive track. We'll continue to grow the industry, and we still have a very strong case out there when the time is right for our airline partners out there. So that's my presentation. I'm more than happy to take whatever questions or comments or anything else we want to discuss.
Good, Doug. Can we maybe, Mike, return back to because I can't see everyone, so we can't see who may have a question.
Let me unshare this, and if we need to go back to
That way we can see everyone. Everyone's muted now.
Yeah, Doug, go to the top. I thought I unmuted, but go to the top with your cursor and then you'll see where you can X out. Let me see if I can maybe.
thought I already X'd out of the presentation, but
Yeah, it's still on. Yeah, it's still on. I think you're getting out of it now. You get out of it.
We're there now. Good.
all right. Yeah.
If anyone has a question, I can't see the couple on the phone, but we can't raise your hand like in Zoom. So if you just physically raise your hand, does anyone have questions for Doug? Super presentation, Doug. I have a bunch, but we should probably hear from some other folks. You'd be surprised if I
Yes,
did.
there is a hand raising icon. It's right in the center of those icons where your mute and camera are. Looks like the profile of a person.
Oh, participants?
Yeah, and if I click on that, you'll see that I have my hand up in the chat. You see that?
No,
We turned the chat off. We were told to just turn the chats off.
It's not the chat, it's the participants window. When you click on that, you'll see my,
Oh, yeah, it's next to, yeah, okay, I see it, participants, yeah.
yeah, see my hands up.
I see it, okay.
That's
no,
because
I
I got a
don't,
question.
maybe Mike, if you could, because I see the participants, I don't see Jerry's hand, so if you could, you could handle this part.
You see Jerry Neesmith?
Oh, yeah, I see you.
I see you, I don't see a hand.
I don't see your hand.
Right
Jerry.
beside my name, on the right side of my name.
Mm-mm.
No, I just see the camera and, no,
Yeah, I'm not seeing it
That's
either.
not a
But
camera, that's a hand.
no, everyone has the same thing, sorry.
go ahead and ask your question,
Go
Jerry.
ahead, yeah.
I don't have a question, I was just trying to help. Let me take my hat down.
Okay.
Anyone have questions?
Hey, Doug, so yeah, just great presentation, by the way. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
And I realize you say that it's likely that the time frame of the grant will be extended and so forth, but and I know you can't give a definitive answer, but I just find it hard to believe that we're going to be in a situation where airlines are going to be expanding their services to new airports in the next few years. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Bain, I would agree with you for the next few years. I'm still thinking, at least my modeling suggests that they're going to get back up to a close capacity level to pre-COVID timeframe by late 2022 to early 2023. And my bet is that it won't be until that timeframe that the airlines are really actively looking at new markets in a significant way. Now, I'm sure there will be some exceptions to it, and community support where there is some sort of financial guarantee or overall marketing support may make a difference as you get closer to that time frame. But the airlines had to walk away from an awful lot of what had historically proven to be very profitable opportunities because of this impact. And I believe those will certainly be the first things that come back. So I do think it's going to delay things for us by at least a couple of years. but that still leaves 3 more years beyond that we might be able to work something in.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't think there's any doubt that there's been a lot of times when, people thought the airline industry was dead. Then the next thing you know, they're having their most profitable times ever. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't count them out anytime soon. But just another real brief and quick question. And you might have hit on this. I'm not sure, but do you have any sense of what the airlines are thinking is going to happen to business travel now that everyone's been exposed to Zoom and all these online meetings? I know in our own company, we're talking about significantly reducing travel, even if there wasn't, um, any real or perceived danger, I should say, in flying. I mean, I just wonder, does the airline industry have a take on that?
Yeah, they absolutely do, and that's a great and very important question, Bain. I've talked to each of the major 4 airline planners or network planners about this, and I've been having sort of weekly updates from both industry sources and some of the big marketing firms out there that are conducting travel related surveys, and all of them seem to point toward what you're suggesting, that there will be an impact. There's no question about that on business travel based on how companies have been sort of forced into trying this new technology in a far more significant way as a result of the pandemic. And so most airlines and most industry experts expect, at least for the next several years, there's going to be a significant. It ranges anywhere from 5 to 20% reduction in business travel out there, depending on who you talk to. Um, uh, I personally believe that yes, it will be a significant reduction in the near term, but as normal business starts to reemerge, that you're going to see a gradual migration back to some more sort of in-person business travel type um, uh, uh, trends, but it'll definitely be reduced. Most folks are saying that they expect the leisure travel, largely based on people having been cooped up for 3 or 4 months and wanting to get back out and do things again, will be the first surge of increased demand. And I think that'll also play into what we're expecting the airlines to do in terms of fare discounts that they're going to be offering out there. But I do think over time that the business travel will start to rebuild, maybe not quite to the levels that they were pre-COVID, but I personally think that, in 3 years' time, you're going to see business travel at least back to a level, not necessarily a level that it could have been had we continued on this trajectory, but to a level that we were at prior to the pandemic hitting. But again, that's my personal belief. Most folks are suggesting the same thing that you're saying, that it's going to have a significant and permanent impact. There's just a debate on how big of an impact that'll be.
Yeah. Well, great presentation, and thank you for all the work you've done. You've really made a big impact for Athens. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Jerry has a question.
Yes, sir. There's all kinds of rumors going around, even on the news, about an airline or two going out of business. Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, I do. The most major airline CEOs were pretty ticked off at David Calhoun from Boeing, who publicly stated it in an interview. I guess it was early last week. The CARES Act, the $50 billion targeted at passenger airlines, obviously is a huge lifeline out there for them. But even when that expires, there's going to be a big financial impact. And, carriers like American, United, and Delta have all been, they spend a lot of time on the earnings call talking about how much either existing cash reserve or potential cash reserves they built up. Both Delta and United made the statement that they made the assumption that they get not a single dollar of revenue the rest of the year, and their flow of cash over that time frame suggests that they're still going to be fine till the end of the year. Well, okay, that only gets you to the end of the year, and granted, there will be some revenue flowing in, but then you may have 2 to 3 more years of sustained losses for the industry. That's going to have an impact, and right now the airlines are saying that's what's driving their commitment to resize their networks and their capacity. But it's quite possible that that some airlines out of this may wind up having to restructure in the process. I don't particularly think it will be any of the big four. American of the top four probably had the most stressed balance sheet going in, and they're adamant that they've got enough cash to manage this process. So I'm not expecting one of those larger airlines, but you're certainly going to see some smaller ones. We've already had some regionals up in Alaska that had to file bankruptcy. You've seen a number of carriers in Europe already go through that process. Two of the biggest carriers in Latin America have already filed bankruptcy, so it's certainly a possibility. I'm just not expecting to see it, among the big 4 to 6 airlines.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
Going back to our situation, and by the way, it's great presentation.
Thanks.
We've always had some half-baked, and all of us have some. We've always just over coffee discussed what's a plan B if we can't get a traditional airline here. And they're all half-baked. Doesn't mean they're bad. It could be charter. It could be non-scheduled charters. It could be finding like Nelliman's and Nelliman's new kind of business model. But do you see? I guess what should we be doing in the next 5 years? Is it worth pursuing trying to attract charters, or you see where I'm going?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to answer in hopefully a less than self-serving way, given that I'm an airline consultant. But
no, we would love to. We might need your guys' help. So
I definitely think it's worth pursuing. There are a couple of takes in my mind on Plan B and C out there for us. Number one, American is, in my perspective, the most stressed of the top 3 or 4 airlines, may be in a little more difficult position to think about new markets in the near-term horizon. United is much less so and has a lot more cash to sort of weather the storm and get its feet back under it. And the United operation to its Dulles hub would serve a very similar purpose to what the American Charlotte proposal in our application would have suggested. Charlotte is a much bigger hub than Dulles. There's no question about it. But the trade-off is Washington, D.C. is a much bigger local market for Athens, and it would have a far more impactful ability to pull that local traffic in on board the airplane. United would be in a better position to do it. The other aspect of it is that this would likely be flown by one of the regional partners, carriers like SkyWest, that typically operate on a capacity purchase arrangement with the major carriers. And so, that might seem to bode well for us, but, while SkyWest's existing network is still being paid for by the airlines, their contracts are forcing them to do that. Any growth to that would be subject to whether an American or United or Delta wanted SkyWest to go into that market. So it might be a little more difficult, but SkyWest, as well as a few other regionals, have the ability to go into markets on their own with a code share partnership with the major airline. So they could go in on what we call a prorate agreement where, American says, SkyWest, go fly this Athens to Charlotte market for us. And you keep all the money for the local passengers, and you keep a portion of the money for all the connecting passengers. And we get to keep the money beyond that. And so American doesn't lose any money on that prospect. SkyWest has a riskier proposition in that they have to be profitable when they do that on their own. But because the rest of their network is being paid for, they might be in a better financial position to entertain those opportunities out there. So that's sort of the first plan B in my mind. The second sort of plan C is that, we talk about leisure probably responding more robustly after, people start getting confident in flying again. And nobody plays that game better than the ultra low cost carriers out there in the industry. And, these are carriers like Allegiant and Spirit and Frontier that go out there offering average fares that are, where the big airline is charging $150 one way, they might be charging $40 one way. I mean, they're typically 60 to 70% lower than what the network carriers charge, but they only fly large aircraft. I think the smallest airplane that one of those three carriers fly is 160 seats or bigger. And they typically start a market by only flying 2 days a week to primarily leisure destinations. Both Frontier and Spirit are in the Atlanta market, and because of their pricing model, they draw their catchment circle, anywhere within sort of a 3-hour drive radius. They hope to pull people into their existing service to get them on board with their prices. So it might be difficult to convince them that Athens would be appropriate new catchment area for them, but Allegiant might be willing to entertain that. Now, Allegiant, based on both the earnings call and both based on all of their press releases that have come out, are suggesting that their leisure markets are responding in a significantly faster fashion than the traditional markets out there. They've said that the Florida markets that they serve, primarily Sanford, which is essentially an Orlando catchment area for them, St. Pete Airport, and their Punta Gorda operation. I think their last press release said something like they're on fire. They're also big in leisure markets out west, with Vegas being prominent among them. But Allegiant has also been experimenting the last 2 or 3 years in some major sized business markets too, and trying to pull, what the traditional network carriers don't want on their airplanes. A Delta Airlines flight, they're not going to let a $50 passenger on board an Atlanta to New York airplane. Well, Allegiant would go for that all day long. So that could be another avenue for us to explore. Is just given the catchment area that these airlines tend to look at, I think Allegiant is really the only one of those top three that might make sense for Athens.
What about we've always thought, never proved it, but the preliminary numbers show like charters. And is that industry going to follow the same curve as you showed us?
I think you'll see an initial surge of charters for companies that can afford it, because you can control the security and safety and health related aspects on board those aircraft in such a better fashion than you can with commercial flying. So yes, I think there will be a bump up in charter operations, private jet operations, that kind of stuff. But the overall cost of that, in my mind, says it's not sustainable. That's only a temporary stopgap until people are comfortable getting back on that traditional commercial aircraft again.
And that's, if you're in our shoes, what would we just sort of cool our heels the next X months, or?
Unfortunately, I think that's probably the case. It would be good to stay abreast of what the airlines are doing and understanding where they're adding capacity and why they're adding capacity and what they're thinking. So when the airlines are willing to go back to industry conferences, sort of like, our conference that we had. In fact, our conference was the last one the industry had back in early March. And when they're ready to start going back out, you probably want to, be at at least one of those conferences a year, just to make sure that your presence is there. You have a chance to meet with the network planners that, are making decisions about markets like yours on a daily basis, and keep that presence out there. But as far as airline meetings go, the airlines have been reluctant to schedule anything on a one-on-one basis. They're hopeful that by late summer, early fall, they'll be back in that mode. But until you have something really meaningful to discuss that is on their radar, then they're going to tell us. I'll be making the request, of both American and United and SkyWest to talk about Athens, but they're not going to have the time or the attention span to focus on markets until they're, it's in a realm of possibility in their minds. And they'll be very quick to tell us, guys, not yet. It'll probably be another 6 months before we're ready to talk about that.
Well, it looks like, and I'll stop, don't hog the conversation, but a lot of the capacity or some of the reductions have come by closing airports that were close to another airport. So you see Delta stopping. So not only did we have X number of competitors, that number is just increased.
Yeah, it's interesting, Les. I mean, the DOT gave the airlines the opportunity to apply for exemptions, and if you're not familiar with it, the one of the hitches to accepting any of the CARES Act money is that the airline had to agree to minimum service levels for any community that they served prior to a certain period of time. And the DOT sort of slid that period of time depending on the seasonal nature of the service from the airlines that were flying. And they said, you're welcome to apply for an exemption. And every airline set out a list of airports that they wanted to exempt from that requirement. Most of the approvals were airports, as you suggest, that were very close to other Akron, Canton, which is so close to Cleveland. They were saying, we serve Cleveland, we can serve the Akron community because of that. Delta tried the same thing with Melbourne, and I don't think the DOT allowed that, because of the proximity to Orlando. And so there were lots of examples like that. JetBlue, by the way, took it the exact opposite approach and said, all the big airports that we serve, like Chicago and Atlanta, and they had a list of a dozen airports that were major airports. They said, we're nobody at that airport. We don't make a difference in our capacity, so let us quit flying there, because the Uniteds, Deltas, and Americans have those airports covered. And the DOT agreed to it. A couple of weeks ago, the DOT also amended their ruling to give the airlines a little more leeway, and they said every airline can pick at least 5 and up to 5% of the communities they serve, and arbitrarily exempt those from the requirement. And so every airline last week applied for a whole host of other airports to exempt, and the DOT, I think, has ruled that they are allowed to do that. But it's interesting, we look at the airports across the US in terms of large hubs, medium hubs, small hubs, and non-hubs. And the group of markets that have seen the smallest capacity reduction of all are the non-hubs, which may seem counterintuitive, but the reason for it is those airlines, those airports had the least service to begin with. So if those airports had any level of minimum service, requirements, then they're going to see smaller reductions than you'll see in the large hubs or medium hubs. Now, I'm willing to bet that as capacity comes back, you're going to see the non-hubs and small hubs a little slower to recoup that capacity. But that's my own personal opinion.
Well, thank you. A lot to think about. Any other questions for Doug? Well, thank you, Doug, and we will definitely be keeping in touch. And
great, I appreciate the time, and Mike, thanks for putting me on the agenda. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Y'all can talk about me or Meeting Hunt or anything else you want to after I sign off. Always good being with you guys, and it's great to see your faces.
Thank you,
Doug.
Doug.
Appreciate it.
okay.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you,
bye-bye.
Doug. All righty, interesting conversation.
Yeah, quite.
Lot to think about. Next on the agenda, or any comments before we move on? No. Mike, you want to pick up with the airport manager reports?
Sure, thank you. Let's start with the financial report. Looking at the financials, let's see if we can get them up here. Okay, so looking at the financials, month to date actual, the sales from fuel avgas was 9,600. You can see from our monthly projections, it's way off. We budgeted for 53,000. Sales Jet A 19,000. Budgeted 147,000. You know, and we knew this was going to be a very, very tough month. We pretty much shut down all operations except for essential. And I'm really thankful for the fuel we did pump in April. Leases came through as normal. Airport fees down, of course, because we didn't have the charters. We had several charters that were on the books, and of course, all that was canceled. So the landing fees and the ramp fees, all that went away. Of course, credit card charges. So going on down to the expenses, of course, pretty much zero expense on avgas or Jet A. Normal airport administration, airport services. Airport maintenance is up a little bit from the projected because we kind of doubled up on the custodial. I think we missed a month, so it hit this month. And then just the normal administrative. But you know, looking at the total revenues minus expenses for the month, we lost 29,000. If you look at the year to date revenues minus expenses, we're still in the plus of 336,000. We're fueling. It's still slow this month. We're fueling aircraft and they're starting to come in a little bit more. Of course, I think that our revenues will be, or I should say, our fuel pumps will be higher than it was in April, of course. But people still are staying away, you know. And this is a slow time for us with the charters. Normally, the charters will, you know, die off a little bit. And of course, we don't have the students here, so the summer months will get kind of slow. But I was really happy to see the fuel sales that we did have, and that we had 26, as I showed, 29,000 in the negative. But it didn't eat too much into our profits that we've had so far. Any questions on the financials? I'll move on down to the operations. We've got avgas in the gallons, 1,900. We usually do about, let's see, 7,000 to 15,000. 15,000 was when we had Falcon here. But so it's, as you can tell, April was a rough month. Jet A, 3,300. We normally do about 25 to 30,000 in Jet A. So that was way down too. And then the operations, 1,600. We normally do around 3,000 to 4,000. And again, some of that is with Falcon. It used to get in the 5,000s with Falcon, but I think a norm would be about 3,000. So April, I do not want to ever see an April again. Not this one. This is a tough one. It was a tough one. Any questions on the operations? Okay. The project update. We are opening up bids, and Jacob, feel free to to chime in if you'd like, but we will be opening up bids this Thursday at 4 p.m. for the Taxiway Alpha project. And we did include the localizer. We added the localizer in with that bid in hopes to get a good price for that project. Did you want to add anything, Jacob, to that? We can't hear you, Jacob. I don't know if you're on mute or not. It doesn't look like you're on mute, though. No, can't hear you. Okay, you're good? Okay, we're good. And then the glide slope, I don't know what I reported last month, but the glide slope antenna was installed. And I think what we were waiting on was the flight check. And the flight check was done. So all's good on the glide slope. We're up and running on the ILS. As far as marketing and outreach, the Athens-Clarke County is wanting to, and I don't know if it's been fully approved, but they want to go ahead and do the fireworks show here at the airport, July 3rd. And so we've had some meetings indirectly and talking about that, the safety, with the police department, fire department, everybody in that realm. So this is something we did in Rome too. We had fireworks with our air show, and the thing that it does do is, it has a lot of debris from the fallout, but it's easily cleaned up with a sweeper truck and that kind of thing. So we're going to have it off of the second runway south if it does come to the airport, and depending on the wind, if we'll just have to kind of watch it, but the airport be closed for about 3 hours. It is okay with the FAA. This is one of those things I had first told them no, because in my experience that if you didn't have it, in conjunction with an aviation related type of function, that you couldn't have just fireworks. Well, GDOT helped me push it a little bit and got down to the nitty gritty, and we found out that it is okay to have just fireworks. Matter of fact, they're good with it. There's just 2 forms we have to fill out, make sure we put a notum out to the world, let them know, that we're having them. So FAA is good with it, GDOT's good with it. We're just kind of waiting to see how everything turns. As far as the COVID-19 impact here, we are still closed to the general public. We're playing it kind of a day by day, week by week. I'm following other airports, seeing what they're doing. There are a couple airports already fully open, but most of them are not. They're kind of like we are. They're handling the essential business. We're not turning away anybody. When it first came about, we were just handling the essential aircraft, the military and emergencies and that thing. Now we did open it up now to everybody, but even at that, people are still adhering, to the request to stay at home or not fly or whatever. So it has been still pretty slow because of that, but we are open to the essential business. We have our terminal building is actually open. The doors are unlocked, but we do have signage in the front that specifies, and it's a big sign that says, just essential business, coming in to pay your bill, or even, just meeting somebody on the air side. If an airplane comes in, a pilot can stay, in the terminal area, just the big room here. And we have vending and of course the restrooms, but we're constantly spraying, we're constantly wiping down, we're making sure all of that, is done. So, and I apologize, Josh, he had to leave at 4. He had to drop out because he had another meeting at 4. But what he was basically going to talk about was Athens-Clarke County and the timeline that we are on. At first, we had a level 1, which was a lockdown, And now we're into level 2, about to go into level 3. May this month was pretty much level 2, and that was basically the workforce protection, emergency services, modified closed workstations, structural reintegration planning, and operational reintegration planning as well. Now, come June, we're still we're about to come June. We're about to get into the level 3, which is limited, and is described as limited, where we'll implement structural reintegration plans with administration, engineering, controls, and implement operational reintegration plans. And all the while, we'll be building PPE and inventory, technology review, and of course, cleaning, disinfectant capability in the buildings. They have created a task workforce, and Angel is on this one for the airport, that will be responsible for each department and how they clean, how they maintain and disinfect. And I think she has a WebEx meeting tomorrow with a lot of them. But perhaps Commissioner Neesmith knows a little bit on this as well.
What that chart does is define the levels and does some predicting about when we'll move from one level to another. But anything can change that. We could move, conceivably back into level 1 if the numbers get bad between now and the end of June, which is likely. But so yeah, it's a good plan, but it's very contingent upon what happens with COVID-19.
Yeah. And I have the chart, and I'll be glad to send it to all of you and let you look at it.
Please.
I know me talking about it's kind of confusing, but I'll send it out to all of you. And that way, if you have any questions, you can contact me or Josh.
Can I ask Michael Pierce maybe to update us on what's going on at the university? You're probably privy to emails and memos none of us see. So.
I wish I were.
Oh, okay.
There are many working groups that were, each of which was appointed by the president and the provost to study everything, as you can imagine. Student life. Will students come back? When would they come back? How would you monitor their health? To research. Can we open the research laboratories anymore? And I'm sure Robert can tell us all about the athletic side, but we did get an email from the president, let's see, a few days ago, that basically said that they were wrapping up their reports, but they have to send them to the regents for the regents to approve what they propose. So that's another big step that slows things down. So I would hope in a couple of weeks we would actually have some guidance. In other words, a timeline. This is what's going to happen. These classes will be canceled. These classes will be scheduled, differently. And I've heard all kinds of different scenarios. So I don't want to waste our time droning on and on. But basically, at this point, we just don't know what's going to happen. There will be classes on campus. I think we can be sure of that, but will they start on time? What will they look like? How many classes will actually be online versus people in residence? Will they open the residence halls? I have no more information. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Michael. Is Robert, are you still there, Robert?
Yeah, I'm still here, and best
Any
answer
football
I could give is, well, I would give one in regards to what I heard Doug say earlier. Our operations, particularly with football, starting with football, will be like a chartered flight. So to say, we'll have the student athletes so they can come back June 8th. That's been granted, but there are some testing procedures and evaluation procedures that still have to be, I don't want to say updated, but noted to give to the university, to give to the Board of Regents, to then get the approval. Also, so we could move forward with those things, you see, and we'll try to have that specific clustered group. But you can imagine if one group starts to come back, how, particularly for fall sports, football, which is the revenue generator, but soccer and volleyball are then chomping at the bit to try to get back in. So we're trying to do this, how should I say, measured from a standpoint of safety, but also knowing that we can't handle but so many students at a time, and trying to keep them in a secure area and make sure that we aren't posing a threat to the rest of the community with anything we're starting in athletics.
No decisions yet made on, or there must be plans A, B, and C on, and this will affect the airport, allowing fans into the stadium.
No, that hasn't even been discussed, because we just had a date that the presidents of the SEC institutions have said, yes, you can come back June 8th, but that doesn't mean everybody's going to come back, that everybody will be allowed to come back, that parents are going to allow their kids to come back, because you got that factor in also, where some parents may say, yes, you can come back and practice and work out, but I don't want my child there, or what are the limits of liability if then something else takes place. So we're still working on all of that. Okay. Before we even look at fans coming back in, we have to get the student athletes here and preparing for seasons to take place.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to old business, Mike, you want to just brief update on the website, and then I can chime in too. So,
Les, could I ask a question about that report that was just given by Mike? Thank you, Mike. I have a question. You said that the airport would be closed for 3 hours. What is that time frame? I guess, are we making preparations and making sure the communities surrounding it are aware of that, or what's going on in that for that event?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. Yes, we will be. Leisure Services is actually the one handling it. They do a very good job in making sure that the community knows what's going on. And then also the NOTAM, the Notice to Airmen, that'll give the notice to all of the aircraft in the area and outside.
Great. And thank you. And I'm just asking that so I can make people aware in this community of where to then find follow-up information about it. When you tell me Leisure Services has it, I know that Kent will do a great job of advertising and making sure the right information is out there. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. That's a great question. And yeah, they will. They always do a great job.
Yes, they do. Yes. Okay. Great.
Okay, so as far as the website, Angela had informed me a couple weeks ago, that ACC, we had put Angela did what she could to correct a lot, and Athens-Clarke County, with their knowledge, was able to do a lot of it as well. And then the remainder, I think, which is just a few items, is something that has to be done through the Civic Plus. So I did ask Les, Les asked a question, I guess last week, and I asked him just to get on, and look and see what he could find. And he was pleasantly, he was happy to see that a lot of it had been done. So that was good.
yeah, I'm fine. I'd say 95%. These were all navigation issues. This was stuff that item A that maybe was showing up under pilots should have been under community or something. So all that's been fixed. Links that were going to the wrong place have been fixed. So really the next challenge, and we can discuss offline, is to get the content and graphics a little going. And we've talked about bringing back our marketing intern who did a phenomenal job. And a few weeks ago, she was on board doing it. And that could be one of her chores. She definitely has the skills to start adding pictures and things like profiles of the staff. And so I think when she shows back up, she'll have to work under Angela's supervision because there's some real strict rules. But I think someone who can devote full time to that, we should be able then to take it to level 2 or 3, where the graphics and the content are a little spiffier. So we're moving along, and thank you and Angela for getting that done. So next item, any leases?
As far as leases, the county attorney is looking at the one lease for Hanson. We also are going to revamp the T-hanger leases and getting that to the county attorney as well. You'll see when I get down to the budget, we did go up by 1.8% on the consumer price index for the leases, across the board. And so we're doing good right now. I'm working on the leases right now. Every time I think I've got it, I always want to tweak it more. But I'm asking a lot of other airports their input, and what they do in certain areas. As far as the hangar and hangars that we're getting back, the Colvin hangar and then also the Falcon hangar. So I want to make sure those leases are good. I'm putting in a lot of the wording that our risk manager likes and that she approves. So once I'll put that in there, and then so she'll look at that, and it shouldn't be any problem because it's what she pretty much wrote for us, and then send that on to the attorney as well. So that's kind of where we are on the leases.
The plan for David to maybe inventory the hangars and everything, is that still?
Yep. That's still a go. With everything, with that, we were really going full steam ahead, and then March kind of slowed us down. But yeah, we still want to do that. Absolutely.
Again, for everyone else, we had David drove good discussions with Mike and a few of us, and it's to make sure the hangars are being used for aircraft reasons. No one's operating a barber shop or storing boats in them. So
yeah, exactly.
It was to really sort of bring a new level of control to the hangars and make sure we're in compliance with FAA and what have you. So thank you, and you guys. Lexington Corridor.
Okay. It'll take only a minute, given all we've still got to discuss. I just wanted to give you a quick update about the schedule and what's coming down. Last time I gave you the list of 6 sets of potential projects, and that our task had been to prioritize, and provide rationales for what we would like to see proposed. There was apparently, Derek Doster says, interestingly, there was a good lot of consensus on what the group prioritized. And what's interesting is that the signage one is actually listed in the set as one for immediate implementation if funded. So that's good news. Some of you may know, or just in general announcement, tonight at 5:30, the Mayor and Commissioners work session, item D on the agenda, is presenting on the Lexington Road corridor potential projects. And so I'll be listening to that, and that will be interesting. 3 of those 6 sets of projects have direct bearing on and benefit to the airport potentially. 2 of them are, one is the entrance, the big entrance, if that ever were to materialize. Another one is the signage, which is marked for immediate implementation. And then the third set is the multiple use trail, which would go around the airport and be linked to the little park on the airport as that's developed. A new ingredient in the schedule is that in the month of June, there'll be 2 opportunities for public input on the potential projects, as is standard procedure. And then also there's been a sort of alignment task undertaken of looking at what we're recommending and proposing and how it lines up with the corridor studies, with the Athens in Motion recommendations, with the Urban Land Institute recommendations, and with the strategic objectives of the Mayor and Commissioners. So they're sort of checking all the boxes to be on firmer ground as to what we are proposing. And then the target month right now apparently is October, to actually have a final list of prioritized proposals that will be recommended and presented to the Mayor and Commissioners in October. So that's the update, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.
I will add to that too. I took Bain's suggestion, and contacted GDOT on some of the signage, the ones that I described with the airplane, and trying to get in touch with it. I think his name's Sean Giles, but I had called them, and put me through to him. But, a lot of folks are still working from home and I haven't heard back yet, but I just had recently contacted him. Hopefully he'll get back with me and we can get moving on that.
Good.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Next topic was the strategic initiatives, and I'm not going to,
Can I ask a question about the budget? Is
we
this a
got,
good time?
that's going to come up in a few minutes.
Okay. All right.
And I'm going to blow through the other stuff. We won't go through the presentation. So within 5 or 10 minutes, if that's okay. We had, if you remember, we had about 10 or so strategic initiatives that we were completing in the third and fourth quarter. And we discussed them last meeting. I sent you a list, and we won't share it online, but we discussed which ones last time continue, not continue. So I sort of formalized it in a list. Take a look at it. It's pretty non-controversial in that it's pretty obvious we're not going to send out an RFI to a restaurant to see their interest in opening at the airport. So something like that's going to be postponed. On the other hand, working on performance measures is something we can do. So again, things like talking to the school district about a maintenance program. So I think you'll see the few items we can continue working on. And in June and the goal will be by our meeting in July to come up, the Finance and Planning Committee, and maybe one or two committee chairs will come up with a list of the initiatives for FY 2021 and present that to the whole group for everyone to take a look at. So you see the list. If you disagree with anything on there, holler. In a more normal world, we probably would have gotten the Finance and Planning Committee together, but it's pretty non-controversial. So I sent that out this morning. So any questions, or just get back to me after you look at it. Okay, the next thing, I'm not gonna, after Doug's presentation, that's no way I'm gonna follow him with the presentation. So I've got off, stop procrastinating, and I finished the performance measures. I've defined all of them. I've developed sample reports. I'm gonna work on them with Mike and then get them out to everyone. There's no new measures. This was just what we're gonna need to implement them. So the presentation was gonna be, how do we roll this out? And I'm going to work with Mike to do what I call crawl, walk, run. So let's start off in July with things that are strategic initiatives that we are working on, the measures for that, and then also key operations measures. So again, we're talking about replacing that little page Mike had with quite a few more measures like gross margin on fuel and key things that are going to drive the strategic measures. So you'll see in this presentation, which I sent out, the way we would divvy up the performance measures based on initiatives we're working on and also which ones we already have access to. Most of the operation measures that we've proposed, and again, those are measures that drive the strategic measures. They're actually of more interest to us because those are things we can act upon and impact the strategic measures. And then there's a third chart, Josh's, and we'll have to discuss with Josh, the technology used. And for the short term, we'll just develop, and I'll work on them, some spreadsheets that will be the reports and allow entering the data. As Josh was planning to introduce that software tool, if you all remember, that was going to be strategic tracker and also measurements. That would be our phase 2. And then maybe a phase 3 would be to automate the data collection, where we can extract data from reports that are already in ACC Gov systems. So I think it's fairly well thought out plan, not being too immodest. And so the next steps is just, I got to work with Mike, and we're close, and just make sure Mike's on board with what we need to do. And the goal would be to have these new reports in July. And most of them we're already collecting the data. It's just now pulling them together. We are going to need a few targets. So we have the budget Mike's going to present in a few minutes that has most of the targets for the budget, but there are things that aren't in the budget, like number of operations we want to set a target on. And Mike actually has set these in some data he supplied in a separate document. So we do have targets for fuel sales and all that. So it's just going to be maybe 4 or 5 that we haven't put targets on. So you've seen, just take a look at the presentation. I'm just going to start executing some next steps. It's not going to be very time consuming. I'll do the bulk of the work, Mike, and just need you to keep me honest. So that was the two. I'm sort of proud I finally got this done. Master of procrastination. I got it done yesterday. So those are those two. One last thing, I do have an update, and this is truly strictly up to Bain and Mike. Should they choose to reapply, love to have them both. Should you choose, the posting has been out there as of Friday. The applications are due the 5th of June. So love to have you both back, but you got to do what you got to do. So the interviews would be the 15th and the appointments would be the 16th. So our fear that they weren't going to get together and we might have a small commission or authority for a couple of months, it's not going to happen. Personally, if you know of anyone interested, I'll put in a plug. I think there's a couple of skills that, while we have a broad range of skills, it'd be really cool to have a true marketing person on our, someone who really understands marketing, and then also, it'd be nice to make sure we still keep a pilot or two. We have David, but another pilot would also probably help. So if you know anyone interested, obviously the number one thing would be some passion for the authority and the airport. So any questions on old business? If not, we'll move on to new business. Air service development strategy. That's the, I think all of us need, I know I need to sleep a while on this, and maybe we get just some meeting, we set up a conference, and I'll put out, anyone interested in talking about now that we've heard what Doug did, what should we be doing the next few months? It just, it's a time to go back to some of these crazy ideas we had. Maybe they're not so crazy, charters, new business models, but, it feels interesting to have $1 million and nowhere to spend it. So, I thought, I actually agree with everything Doug said, except personally, I'm not sure leisure travel, at least my age group, I think we're going to see a lot of people doing road trips. And I think Bain made a great point. I look back as a business traveler every week. 10 years ago, before this technology was there, probably a third to half the trips I made could have been done. If I knew the people already, and it was just, there wasn't a need for me to hop on a plane, essentially lose 2 days for a 3 or 4 hour meeting. So Mike's going to give us a brief update on the budget. I don't know if we've sent it out yet.
No, I will get it
I
to
don't
you.
think, yeah.
Basically, what it is our operating budget. I know that a couple months ago, I went over the capital budget. Well, there's not much changed on the operating budget, and they like to keep it pretty much the same as is. However, there is some changes to this one, just a few of them. As I mentioned earlier, the leases across the board, 1.8% on the Consumer Price Index. Airport fees increased. So the ramp fees, all of that was increased in the budget. And I will get this out to you, I apologize. And so that, we showed a tremendous increase in that, as you could see from our current financials. And then, ACC handles the salaries and wages, so I have no control over that. I'm not quite sure where that is at this point in time. So it's still a work in progress. And then the other biggie, which, can be reversed, but the transfer in from Athens-Clarke County was taken out. Because this year, with what I was doing, my goal was to eliminate that and be, yeah. And in the financials that I report every month, I don't include that in. That is strictly us, alone. And so I felt like it was time to kind of break away from the help, of Athens-Clarke County, and if we didn't need it. And but I'm an optimist. I'm still hoping, that with everything going on, we'll still come out good, and we won't have to, rely on the general fund at all. We'll be self-sufficient. So.
Mike, we've lost your video, or it's just me maybe, but you've disappeared. But
Oh, I did?
can hear you though. So.
Oh, okay. I see myself, so I don't know. I don't know what happened to me.
Just me who can't see Mike? No.
Nobody can see me? Okay, yeah. Angela says she can't see me. Oh, yeah, it is frozen. I see it is frozen. Let me see if I stop my video and then start it again.
Uh,
There you go. How's that?
no. There you are. Just to
Okay.
comment again, the main measure, and it is going to be one of our strategic measures, is whether or not we needed the transfer in that Mike talked about. You really can't get to that number unless you see the old format of the financial reports, and it's sort of below the line. And we've, Bain and Mike's, rightfully so, the statements we run to are really more management reports. But right now, if the clock were to stop, we could easily return to 105, but
Mhm.
based on what's going to happen in the next 2 months, that may change. So, but
Well, I still have some things, like if we get some of these leases, we're getting, we're getting the Falcon hangar that will be ours come July 1st. So there's some things that will add to our revenue, and I'm hoping that they'll add enough where we won't have to worry about it.
we've also talked in before, just like Jerry's question, is making sure we have some money somewhere to pay for the interns for our marketing effort. So Mike assures me that's there.
Yeah, we got some area where we can pull from, so yeah, I feel good about that.
We've learned, by the way, hiring the intern was only at $500, but getting the intern paid, it's almost no different than hiring someone to come in and repave the runway. So it's a lot of paperwork. Jerry, you had a question for.
Yeah, the mayor has presented his proposed budget, and there are no transfers to the airport. There's no money for the airport in that budget. Is that wise?
Well, I would say this. When I looked at it, my intent was to take it out, and there was no way for me to get in there and take it out because finance blocks it. And then when I talked to Josh, he said, "Oh, by the way, we took it out." And I said, "Well, good. I wanted it out, but now, but Josh has always told me now. Josh has always told me, he said, now, if we need to put it back in, we can put it back in, at any time."
You better do it soon.
Yeah, I would.
Better do it soon, because the budget is very troublesome. I believe the mayor, this is my personal opinion, I think he's too optimistic. And part of the budget, about $2.5 million of it, is paid for by increased property taxes because assessments went up, valuations went up. There's a great deal of pressure on us to roll back the millage rate, neutralize those assessments. That's going to be a big hit on the budget. So now if you put it in, it might just be something that we get to cut, but you really, if you want it in, you need to do it soon, because we're about to go into some very serious discussions about this budget. They're going to.
All righty.
I
I'll
can't
get with
answer from-
Josh and see what he says then. Okay. I appreciate
Worked on
that.
those forecasts, and we came within a few thousand for this month. If this question was asked in February 28th, the answer would be an emphatic no, that we don't need to transfer.
Yeah.
Given
It's
that
different now.
given that we're sailing into uncharted waters, I think it'd be very risky not to, just one person's opinion, to not have it in there. Because you saw this month, which I don't think we'll ever have a worse month than this, but
No, but it's still slow. It's still slow. But that's good advice. Real good.
We don't know what's going to happen with football season. We just don't know.
so,
We don't. No, we sure don't.
so this would be the
We rely on the fans. We rely on the fans. I mean, that's a big part of our revenue. Not just the charters. I mean, the fans. So, yeah.
Okay, so Mike's going to look into that. Anyone else have a comment on Jerry's point? Okay, we had 3 requests for zoning, and I just want to make sure, having screwed this up a while ago. Again, Mike's going to talk about them, educate us a bit, but bottom line is we turn this over to the operations committee. David and Robert will study the documents that Mike's going to give them, and they will come back in June with a recommendation. And again, they review this against the Code of Ordinances. I think it's chapter 9-3 or 13. Very specific what can go in the overlay district, and they balance that against some things. But all we're going to talk about today is just understand it a bit. And David and Robert get back next month, and we'll lead a thorough discussion of it. So turn it over to you, Mike.
All right, thank you. Well, we received 3 staff reports from planning on May 19th. The first one is for property at 498 Little Oak Street. The intention is to build 2 new single-family residences on undeveloped land to include 2 farmhouse-style homes. One will be facing Little Oak Street. The second will be facing Dublin Street. They will be in the 1,800 to 2,100 square foot range with 3 to 4 bedrooms in each. Now, this location is, if you're at the airport and you're heading toward Broad, it's just past 78, you go under the bridge near the new gas station that's being built. It's right in that location there. So the second one is for property at 594 Oconee Street. It's 15,300 square foot of general office space and 2 multifamily buildings, 1 duplex of 2 3-bedroom units and 1 4-bedroom cottage, a total of 10 bedrooms. And this one is heading toward Broad as well, just past 78. It's going to be on the left just before you get to Broad. It's kind of between 78 and Broad, kind of in that area. And the third one is property at 1825, 1885, and 1889 Lexington Road. It's intended to be used for both commercial and residential use. The commercial space will be 9,600 square feet divided into 4 buildings and will be fronting Lexington Road. The residential space is 115 dwelling units with a total of 162 bedrooms. The residential units will be divided among the upper floors of the 4 buildings, each to be 3 stories in height. They will be split up as 36 studio apartments, 32 1-bedroom units, and 47 2-bedroom units. And this location is on Lexington across the street. If you're familiar with this area, it's a Chevron gas station just west of Dollar General and Babcock Home Furniture. It's I don't know how better explain it, but it pretty much butts up against Hobbs. I think it's Hobbs Road or something like that.
Hobbs.
Yeah. Now, the thing, of course, is some of the new ones, what we look at is the height and the density, where it is with relation to our approaches and other critical areas. So I'll also get this to Jacob. I'll let Jacob look at it too as well. But those are the 3 that will be going to committee.
And David's responded. David, do you need any more info, you and Robert, to take a look at this, or?
No, I think that we need to come back with what we need to come back with. So we'll do that. I will talk and we'll meet, and then we'll give you our synopsis next.
And again, correct me, Mike, and the process then is we're one piece of information, then it goes to the planning, and they make
That's
a
my
recommendation.
understanding.
And then I think the commission ultimately has to decide.
That's correct.
Alrighty, anything else before we ask for close out the meeting? Adjourn. Again, thank you all. Our next meeting is June 23rd. My guess with pretty good certainty is we'll probably be WebExing again, I imagine.
I imagine so.
Yes. And just everyone stay healthy. And thank you all.
Thanks, Les. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thank you all.
See you
I'll
later.
send out, Mike's going to send out the budget, and I have one other thing I'll remember to send out. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
See you all.